State Biological Sciences, there we go. Talking on the emerald ash borer, which is a topic near and dear to our hearts since we started the Nature Society pretty much the first year it hit, and watched pretty much, well, we watched every large ash in the parks go down within a couple of years. We do see some small saplings and seedlings that have come up and not died, but even a lot of those, because there were an awful lot of very small ash that were growing that first couple of years. So it'll be interesting after all these years what's really been learned, because of course at that point it was a lot of speculation, and hopefully we'll hear things that make us feel good. I hope.
Yeah, we'll see. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Is this like too horribly loud? Because I can always... Okay, good. All right, well, thanks for having me. As he said, I am from Wayne State. I'm in the biology program there. I've been there for 10 years. I was born and bred in Redford, okay? So I left and came back to Wayne State. And a lot, I think, you know, most of you have been exposed to the whole emerald ash borer story for a while. So perhaps much of what I say in the beginning here is going to sound pretty familiar or even old. But you'll see as I go on that my story is a little different. And I'm a little frustrated because I can't get the story out, because the story that's out there about emerald ash borer has inertia that's incredibly difficult to overcome, even though I don't think it's right. And so as we go along, hopefully you don't see my frustration, but it's there. And hopefully I'll convince you at least. Okay, so you know about the emerald ash borer, but here's the background on it, okay? Came into southeastern Michigan from Asia sometime in the 1990s. We're not exactly sure when. They figured out what it was. They found it in 2002. So it hasn't really been known for very long, even though it's been here. It was here for over 10 years before they even knew what it was and what was killing the ash trees. And it attacks all the different species of ash in Michigan. So we have several. The big ones are green ash, some people call red ash, black ash and white ash, okay? But there's blue ash, there's pumpkin ash, and it attacks and kills all of them, okay? It's a genus-specific pest. It's not a species-specific pest. It kills all ash trees down to about 1 inch in diameter, okay? So basically everything except saplings and seedlings, and even some of those saplings and seedlings get killed as well, depending on the population levels of the ash borer and the population levels of the trees, okay? So it's killed millions and millions and millions and millions of ash trees, mostly in the lake states, but certainly in many other states as well, okay? And so this is a bark beetle. There it is, okay? There they are looking out, okay? And what they do is they crawl underneath the bark and they eat the phloem of the tree. So the larvae go back and forth and they create these galleries to the point where they girdle the tree, where they're cutting off the supply of nutrients from the root or from the leaves to the roots, okay, and the tree dies, okay? So it might seem like it would take a long time to girdle a tree, but they are voracious eaters and it doesn't take very long at all. So here is an idea of what a ash tree looks like as it progresses through the tree. So it starts out here, a healthy ash tree, and slowly, by the way, these ash borers attack high in the tree first, and then they slowly move down the tree. Okay. So the first place they hit is up in the tree, which is why it's so difficult to detect. By the time your tree or a tree starts looking sick, like in this area or so, it's probably already too late because it's probably heavily infested in the crown and it's just starting to move down. And it usually, once you see symptoms, it takes 2 years before the tree's dead, usually. Okay. So you can see this general progression from a healthy tree as the crown gets thinner and thinner and thinner. Many trees we see out there that are alive today are at this sort of 70 or 80% crown death, okay? And then, of course, you know what a dead tree looks like, okay? And, of course, it all started here, okay? It was introduced in the Garden City, Westland area, they think. They've used some tree ring studies and some dendrochronology to figure out that that's where it probably came. They're thinking it came in on pallets from Asia, auto packing materials from Asia. And so it was first released from that. It first got out into urban trees, into the urban forest in that Garden City, Westland area. So you can see this is a map showing you the darkest areas are where it has been the longest. right? So this says 2002 to 2004, and then you can see it sort of spread out from there, okay? Interesting that no one's really been able to do anything about it. No matter what people have done, there has been really no stopping the emerald ash borer. The most interesting that I saw is in Ontario, where they tried to create an ash-free zone, okay? So here is Lake St. Clair, okay? And this ash-free zone is right here across this peninsula of southern Ontario. They're trying to remove, they tried to in 2003, 2004, remove every ash tree from that zone, okay? So I wrote up there 10 kilometers wide by 35 kilometers long. They cut out the trees, they chipped them all up to try to kill anything that would be in those trees, and then they ground out the stumps so they wouldn't resprout, just to try to create a no man's zone, no man's land, right? With the idea that, oh my God, here's Michigan and Detroit and it's coming up and we're going to stop it, and it didn't work. It just jumped right over it, okay? So this was sort of one of the most extreme things. I mean, they're cutting without, it's sort of the imminent domain of ash trees. They were just coming, showing up one day and cutting your tree down and grinding out the stump and leaving a hole in your lawn and then going to your neighbor and doing the same thing. So didn't work. This is what the distribution looked like in 2008, okay? This is about when I started working on emerald ash borer or ash trees. I should emphasize that I'm a forest ecologist and not an entomologist, okay? So most of what you're going to hear is from the forest ecology perspective. So when I started working on ash trees in 2008, it was in 7 states and Ontario, okay? What's interesting is here's the introduction point. There we are, okay? And you can see these red dots were positive identifications, right? So it's moving in 2 ways, or it did move in 2 ways. So this was about 6 years down the line since they discovered it, right? It moves in a wave, as many invasive species do. They start at a point and they move in a wave out from that point. But it also moved, it's spotted like a fire, okay? And you can see how it's spotted right down this line, right down this line, right down this line. This doesn't show up too well in 2008 yet, but across here and down there, and those are freeways, okay? So real interesting, you have sort of 2 methods of spread of emerald ash borer early on. Again, this was 2008, and this is now, okay? So now we're at 30 states, and it's in Quebec as well as Ontario, and it's a mess, okay? So for the longest time, Delaware was a holdout, for some reason, and it just got hit last year, okay? Maryland was a area where they got it into a nursery, got into nursery stock, and they were just trying like hell to eradicate it. And so it was just one little spot in Maryland for the longest time, and they're trying to eradicate and doing their best, and it just didn't work. So it got out, and now it's all over Maryland, all over the eastern seaboard, okay? South Carolina and Florida are holdouts now, okay, but it's slowly moving west. And the fear is, you might say, well, there's the Great Plains, right? But there's rivers running east-west, and one of the big river species is green ash. So there have been, this is Boulder, Colorado, okay, that was carried there, okay? I don't exactly know the story of how it was carried there, but it was carried there. It didn't spread there, but it's certainly going to connect between Boulder, Colorado, and everything in the east, okay? So, bad news. Now, the biggest reason that emerald ash borer, well, there's 2 reasons that emerald ash borer has gained notoriety is because it's killed street trees. It's killed trees in people's backyards, front yards, whatever. And interestingly, it didn't really gain a lot of notoriety until it hit New York. Okay, for the longest time when it was in Michigan and Ohio and Indiana and Illinois, it was like, oh, okay, so the lake states have a pest. And then as soon as it hit New York, Syracuse, right, you started hearing it on NPR. Big stories about EAB as soon as it hit New York. But the main reason that EAB has gained attention is because it's killed street trees. And in the Midwest, the lake states, one of the big street trees now was green ash, okay? So this is a couple of photos taken from Toledo, okay? This is 2006, these big tree-lined streets of ash, and then 3 years later you can see the same time they're all dead, right? So an interesting part of this is a little bit of history quickly of Detroit, right? This isn't Detroit, but this is what many streets in Detroit used to look like. They had these big, beautiful elm trees known as cathedral elm trees. Everybody had an elm tree, okay? This is a very wealthy neighborhood in Connecticut, and if you look closely, you can see every elm tree is treated, which costs a lot of money, right? But there's these big, beautiful elm trees, and then Dutch elm disease came through in between the 40s and the 70s, right? Pretty much knocked out all the elm trees, and what did they replace them with? They replaced them with ash. Everybody had an ash tree. Your neighbor had an ash tree, same thing, same kind of deal, and so now those are getting hit. So this idea of trying, not only having this sort of monoculture on city streets, but then replacing it with an additional monoculture has sort of proven the wrong strategy, obviously. All right. So obviously these areas, especially in the suburbs, have become death zones in the Midwest especially, but all across the eastern United States. You can see all the dead trees here. You can see, this is again a shot from Toledo where you can see all the crowns of the trees that are dead, and here's a street shot, all the crowns of trees are dead. And it costs a lot of money to get those trees out, especially when you have that many planted in a neighborhood. It's not cheap to remove. It's not cheap to replace. It's very, very expensive. And so what happens is a lot of times you just don't. Okay? And interestingly, if you go into the city of Detroit, okay, and you go to blighted neighborhoods, one of the classic characteristics of a blighted neighborhood is a lack of trees. Okay? So tree replacement is something that happens in more affluent neighborhoods, right? It doesn't happen in poorer neighborhoods very much. And there aren't a whole lot of studies out there that talk about health benefits of having trees, but I know there are some, okay, both mental health as well as physical health, okay? They are there. Folks will do this kind of work eventually, okay? But again, many of these areas that were hit by Dutch elm disease, drive to Highland Park sometime, and you drive down Elmhurst, which was named that for a reason, and there's no trees, right? And now those neighborhoods in the city that were replanted between the 50s and the 70s with ash are now looking the same way, and they probably won't be replaced. So this has sort of wide-ranging effects in urban areas for certain. And again, you can save your ash trees, but it costs a lot of money. Okay? So you can inoculate ash trees. It has to be done every year. Okay? And it's just really expensive. Grosse Pointe had an inoculation program for quite some time, and even they decided it was too expensive. So not only that, but there are very likely ecological effects. There have been studies that have shown that the pesticide that they've used to inoculate, by the way, this inoculation is like 95 to 97% effective. It really works, but it's poison. And there have been several studies that have shown this gets into the pollen, which is then spread. So it might be good that it's expensive. Okay. Now, those are the urban effects, and I'm going to leave them for a minute, and I'm going to go to natural areas, okay, because that's what I've studied. And in 2007, I started a study with a guy named John Witter, who was an entomologist at U of M. And we did a study basically just to get an idea of what the ash looked like out there and whether or not it could have the possibility of coming back. Okay, so this was in 2007. And so we sampled at varying distances away from the introduction point, okay? And you can see it didn't look good. So 99% of the ash trees were dead really close to the introduction point, and then it slowly tapered off as you got further out. If we were to do this again today, well, maybe not today, but if we were to have done this 5 years later, these numbers would be up towards 100% as well. Okay, so things did not look good at all. And if we looked at regeneration, which we did, that also did not look good. Okay, so this graph is showing you 1 to 2 year seedlings, so brand new ash seedlings that we went and counted in all these different sites, as well as bigger ash seedlings. And I'm pointing at this one because on river floodplains, that's where you find green ash, and that's what I'm going to focus mostly on today. And there just wasn't very much out there, okay? Not only was there not very much out there, so this is a graph here showing you 2007 data and then 2009 data, new seedlings, brand new baby seedlings, okay? Which represents, okay, are we getting more new ash regeneration? Okay. Because you would expect to find seedlings and saplings out there that came from the trees before they were killed. We were interested in stuff that were coming in the last 2 years, brand new seedlings. And you can see the difference between the number of new seedlings in 2007, which already was pretty low, and the number of new seedlings in 2009. The bottom was literally dropping out. And the scary thing was, this is data from a student at MSU, where they were finding, even near the introduction point, which he was calling the core area, they were still finding EAB. So not only were the seedlings going down, but there were still bugs there to kill anything that might make it. Okay? So this is bad. Very bad. And so there were a lot of papers, myself included, in the literature where people thought that ash was going to go away for good, okay? So this was our paper where we said current regeneration density on the landscape may be the final cohort of ash seedlings if EAB returns to attack and kill the maturing saplings before they reach reproductive age. So anything that's making seed, we were expecting to get killed. And then the new seedlings, we were expecting to get killed as soon as they got large enough to get killed, okay? This study, Klooster, this was in 2013. If current ash regeneration is extirpated by EAB before reproducing, green, black, and white ash will be functionally extirpated from our study sites, potentially over much of their range, okay? And this last study, which is the student at MSU, the likelihood that green ash will persist as an important forest species once areas are invaded by EAB appears to be minimal. So people literally thought this thing was going away. There is a website called emeraldashborer.info. You can go to it and learn as much about emerald ash borer as you could possibly want to know, okay? This used to be up there. This says right here in this circle, if you can't see it, I can hardly see it, in the event that the emerald ash borer cannot be contained, the Rose Lake Plant Materials Center is taking steps to see that the ash doesn't vanish forever. So this was a seed collection study. They were going out and hurriedly collecting as much ash seed as they possibly could, just so they would have something there for, I don't know why, so they could say that they had ash seed after the rest of the ash is killed off. They certainly, at the time, you know, there were no plans to plant this because it would just get killed, but the idea was to hopefully come up with some way of containing emerald ash borer and then have seed to reintroduce ash. That was the idea. But they literally thought it was going to go away forever, okay? Now, interestingly, we can go back to elm for a minute. So with elm, Dutch elm disease came through, as I said, and people said the same kind of thing, almost word for word, that it was going to vanish forever, okay? This is this old study done in the 70s by Bert Barnes, who used to be at U of M, okay, where he sampled a bunch of areas with elm before Dutch elm disease came through and then after, okay? What you can see is they surely lost a lot of trees. Trees were gone, but not completely. And so what happened with elm was that Dutch elm disease came through but didn't kill the trees before they reproduced. So you get these trees that shoot up, they make a bunch of seed, and then the tree dies. Well, it doesn't matter because there's a bunch of seeds, so then those seeds germinate and they grow up, and they make a bunch of seed, and then they die. So what happens is you go out in a forest today, and there's elm everywhere. It's just ugly and squirrely and small. We don't have big elms like you see on the streets anymore, certainly, but elm has not gone away at all. It just looks completely different, okay? And so the question that we've been interested in figuring out is whether or not ash is going to follow that model, where it would, emerald ash borer will kill ash after it reproduces, and so ash will be able to persist. Or is it more like chestnut blight? Okay? Chestnut blight came through from the turn of the century through the 40s, especially in the southeastern United States. Chestnut used to be a major dominant tree species. huge trees, right? Beautifully resistant wood. They used to make, in the old days, plumbing out of chestnut wood. It was so resistant to rot. So this is highly valued tree, highly dominant tree. Chestnut blight is a pathogen that was introduced, and it kills the trees before they reproduce. That's why we see hardly any chestnut on the landscape at all. Okay, so two very different models, and the question is, which one is emerald ash borer going to follow? Most people say this one. That's certainly what I thought for a while. Okay, so if you go out and you see the popular literature, it's even better. You get these awesome headlines. After the trees disappear, okay, ash forests after emerald ash borers destroy them. That middle one there, will we kiss our ash goodbye? A cute little play on words there, okay? It says, an ecological catastrophe is unfolding across the upper Midwest and is spreading outward as scientists struggle to find solutions to the latest insect invasion, emerald ash borer. Bottom one says, Battle of the Ash Borer. This is my favorite. The ash borer has wiped out virtually every ash tree in southeastern Michigan. In much of the rest of the state's lower peninsula, there are a few trees left to fight for. Okay, so you get the idea of the general thinking of what's going on here. And so I was sad. Okay, and then one day in 2010, I was driving. I live in Livingston County, so I'm driving. People drive slow in Livingston County. So I'm driving slow in Livingston County, and I look up, and what do I see? First of all, I see an ash tree, seemingly out of nowhere, and that ash tree is full of seeds, full of fruits. Okay, tons and tons, and so I'm jumping out of the car, I'm taking pictures with it, my cell phone, kids are like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I don't know, I'm taking pictures of these ugly, small looking ash trees that are full of seeds. And then I started looking around, and these things were everywhere. And then the next year, in 2011, it was a mast year for ash. So you're driving, so I took a picture of this tree, Mayberry State Park, just absolutely loaded. And again, it was like, where'd this ash tree come from? Oh my God, look at all the seeds. They're just loaded with seeds. If you follow this along, so 2011 was a mast year, which is a year where certain species or genus of trees will just produce tons and tons and tons of fruit. Oaks are really famous for masting. Wildlife people love masting in oaks because it provides a lot of feed. But a lot of the hardwood species do it, and ash did it in 2011. And in 2013, there was another, not quite this heavy, but another really good seed year. Okay? And so I started thinking, what's going on? First of all, why are we seeing ash? These are supposed to be dead. I was thinking they were dead. My own work said that they were going to die. And secondly, they're producing seeds. So I started to think about this. And I realized that everywhere we had sampled, and then I went back and looked at the studies in the literature, and everywhere people had sampled and done work was in a mixed stand. Okay? It wasn't a pure stand of ash, mainly because we don't have a lot of them. It was in a mixed stand with other hardwoods. Okay? So in mesic hardwoods, which is where you find white ash, maybe 20% of the trees were ash. Okay? In drier hardwood stands, also you find white ash there, maybe, again, 21%. Okay? In river floodplains, where you find green ash, there was more, but it's still only about a third. Okay? And then in deciduous swamps, where you find black ash, there's about a quarter. Okay? Point being, these were not stands of ash, these were mixed stands. So I started to wonder if this mattered. Does this make a difference? Okay? Do you need more? Maybe you need more ash trees there to get ash trees surviving. And I started to look around, and if you didn't notice back in the day, back in 2011 or so, you could be driving down the freeways and you could look and you'd see these huge patches of dead ash. So this one right here, I pulled over on I-75. This is right where I-75 and 23 come together. Okay, so big patch of pure ash. So my idea was maybe we should sample those. Maybe we should start to look at those pure stands of ash, and maybe that would make a difference. Okay, and these stands that are looking like this, they're like 97% ash. So they're there. They're very small. Some of them are the size of this auditorium, that small. Okay, but they're there. And so we did. We sampled in detail for 5 years. I keep saying we, it was just me. Sampled 5 years in detail, 20 different stands, and we found some stuff that was surprising and some stuff that wasn't surprising. The biggest non-surprise is, yeah, these green ash stands, this is all green ash that we sampled, were heavily altered. The ash borer went in and screwed up these stands. No big surprise, right? Okay. So the density of ash trees here was reduced by about a little less than 60%. Okay. 76% of the wood volume of ash in these stands on average was killed by EAB. Okay. And then the mean tree diameter was reduced from about 12 centimeters to about 8. Okay. So you can look at this in two ways. You can say, oh my God, these stands have been really messed up by emerald ash borer, which I would agree with. But you could look at this and say, that's not 97%, that's 58%. Okay, which means there's still trees out there. Now, the scary thing is that the surviving ash in these stands are still being hit by EAB. Okay, so there's a variety of different ways to figure this out. We found about 20% of the remaining live trees showed definite signs of infestation. Signs would be these characteristic D-shaped holes in the bark. That's where the bug emerges upon maturity, and it chews a D-shaped hole in the bark. Okay, these on younger trees, when the bark splits like this, it almost certainly has larvae underneath it doing their thing. Okay, and certainly if you see extensive woodpecker damage right now in this part of the country, it's almost certainly EAB in there if it's an ash tree. Okay, so we were able to find this evidence on a lot of the live trees. So I'm not telling you that EAB is gone, but it's certainly lower. It has to be lower because there's not as much ash anymore, right? But it's certainly not what it was. So what's going on? Sprouting. These ash stands were sprouting like mad. Most of the regeneration in these ash stands, these pure ash stands, were sprouts. Okay? So over or around 2/3 of all the trees that had been killed by emerald ash borer were sprouting. So they hadn't been killed by emerald ash borer, in fact. Okay? And the interesting thing was we published that paper back, we had taken the data in 2007 and 2008, and nothing was sprouting. So that was 6 years after they discovered that emerald ash borer was killing trees, and nothing had sprouted that long. There was a lag time for things to start sprouting until 2010, 2011. Nobody saw it. If you go back in the literature and you look, most of the studies that have been done that were documenting this massive die-off were prior to that. So they probably missed the sprouting too, right? So I think sprouting is really, really important. And so if you go out in the forests, it certainly looks better than this even now. Took this in 2012, I think. You see these dead trees, but you see a sprout coming right up underneath that dead tree, right from the same stump. Okay? So these stands had tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of sprout. And as I looked closer, many of the trees that were still alive were actually sprouts. And you couldn't even tell anymore because sprouts grow like gangbusters. They grow like gangbusters because they're growing off an established root system. Okay, so you picture a little sapling with an adult root system of a big tree, right? So these things shoot up into the canopy. They grow really, really fast. And we looked at, we did some cores, and we looked at the ring widths. And this line right here is the rate of growth of a sprout compared to this line here, which is the rate of growth of a mature tree. I mean, they grow really, 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 really fast. So you can literally go out there, and if you're not careful, you'll mistake living ash trees as a seedling tree when actually, if you dig around at the base, you'll see that it's kind of crooked at the bottom. It comes out like that, and then it grows up. It's a sprout. Okay? What was even more exciting is that in 2011, in the mass year, many of those sprouts were making seeds. Okay? So it wasn't just, okay, great, we've got a couple of ugly-looking trees under the dead trees. It was that these ugly-looking trees were making seeds with the potential to make new trees. Okay? So there they are, sprouting ash are producing seeds. So here's a picture of it right here. You can hardly see the seeds, I know. But here's the dead tree, here's the sprout coming up, there are seeds right there. This is a sprout right here. Lots and lots of seeds there. Okay? Sprouts of all ages and sizes were producing seeds in those 2 years, in the mash year and in the heavy seed year. Okay? And that's really important if you're interested in having ash in natural areas. You need seed to get it. And the seed's coming from a very unlikely place. The seed's also coming from some of the trees that weren't killed as well. Without going through all of this, we did some studies spatially where we set up seed traps. I did some studies spatially where I set up seed traps in these stands to try to figure out where the seed was falling. And we found in that mash year, the seed was falling across most of the stand. Okay? In the non-mashed years, seed was falling across 2/3 of the stand. So it was getting really good coverage, and good coverage is important if you're going to get a seed to hit a spot where it will grow, because it's obviously not going to grow everywhere. So the more of that stand that you can cover with seed, the more likely you're going to get some of those seeds to grow. And the coverage was very, 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 very good. Okay? So the point is we have continued seed input into these stands. Okay? How much depends on the year. So in the mashed year, we're getting 100 seeds per meter squared, 72 in the good seed year, and a lot less in a normal year. Okay, less than 16. So just for a reference, there was a study done prior to EAB, really, where they documented about 60 seeds per meter squared in southeastern Michigan for ash stands. Okay, so it's basically negligible in a normal seed year, but in a good seed year, we're doing pretty well. Okay. Important thing is the seed is actually growing into seedlings. So we did some I did some germination studies. I keep saying that. Where we took the seed into a greenhouse and planted it, and the germination rate was like 80%. So it's not non-viable seed, it's viable seed. Okay? And we were finding germination was really high and establishment was really high in the year after those good seed years. Okay? So we were getting more than 1,200 new seedlings per hectare following those good seed years. So this is good. And you can see a picture of it right here. Here's a fallen, dead ash tree, and this is all ash seedlings. Okay, that was in Delhi Metro Park, I think. Okay. All right. So I think the news is good in natural areas. So let's come back to these street trees for a minute. Guess what? The street trees sprout too. We just don't know it because they get cut out and the stumps ground out so quickly. Where do they not cut out and grind out street trees? In Detroit. This is in Detroit. Okay? So this was a sprouting, so there you see the stump. This was a sprouting green ash. Okay? I had a colleague who actually went back to this tree. This is her son. Went back and was pruning this, and within 5 years, there it is. Okay? Here's another spot in Detroit. Okay? This is actually well, the picture on the left is, where's my button? Picture on the left is a sprouting street tree. This one on the right is more of a surviving green ash on the street in Detroit. Okay? So this one you can see, this is what's left of the original crown, but all this under here, almost all of it under there, is sprouting up out of the bowl of the tree. Okay? And even in Livingston County in Hickville, USA, right? This is near the Humane Society. You can tell these are sprouts because they're crooked, right? There's my daughter, but it's a crooked tree, but there is a stump right there, okay? And they spent the time to take care of this and prune it a little bit, and you get these street trees back, okay? So it does happen if you're willing to deal with this tree that's ugly for a while, okay? So, I think it's way too early to tell, but at least in natural areas, it looks to me like these things are going to hang on. It really does. These stands are going to hang on. Ash, not every ash is going to live. Not every ash that survives is going to continue to survive. But I think green ash is not going to disappear. Not by a long shot. And I should say, a lot of the worry about green ash disappearing, it's not just, I mean, a big part of it is because people want pretty trees, right? But another part of it is that there are a lot of species out there, particularly insects, that require, they're species specific, so they need to have ash to feed on, and the ash is still there, I think. Okay. So I started to ask, why green ash? What is it about green ash in natural areas that allows it to hang on? Okay. And what can this say for the other ash species? Well, here's what we know about green ash ecologically. We find green ash in wet places normally, not always, because they can invade the uplands too. But we often find them in wet places that grow where it's wet into the growing season, okay? And that's important because that wetness reduces competition from other species. It makes it hard for other species to grow while green ash can do okay there, okay? It also prevents a really thick canopy from developing, and green ash is fairly shade intolerant when it's younger, so it can't grow under a heavy canopy. But when you're growing in a wet area, you don't get a heavy canopy, and so that favors the reproduction of green ash. Okay. So we also know that the seeds will survive underwater. Okay. Interesting thing about green ash is the seeds will germinate, the seeds will germinate immediately the next season in the first year after they're shed. Okay. Unless they're underwater, and they'll sit there underwater and they'll sit there and remain viable, and as soon as that water dries up, they germinate and sprout. So if you go to Belle Isle, and they have a lot of green ash on Belle Isle, again, because it's a river floodplain species. If you go into the wooded part of Belle Isle, you'll find these huge patches. They're not huge, but they're hugely dense, I should say. They're small patches, but they're really, really dense. And what happens is, these areas were wet, and all the seed collected in these areas, right? They're little holes, little depressions. And all the seed collects in them, and they remain wet, and as soon as that wetness dried out in a dry summer, they all germinated at once. And so you get these really thick patches of green ash in these stands. So they don't make a seed bank unless, I mean, if you want to call sitting underwater a seed bank, you can, but they don't make a traditional seed bank, okay? We've already talked about they sprout vigorously after disturbances, boom, right? And they do grow in pure stands as well as mixed stands. So compare that with white ash. Okay, white ash grows in uplands, not in wet places. These are shady forests. And so the seedlings are subjected to deep shade, and they need gaps in the canopy to grow. Okay, they grow much, much slower than green ash do, even in high light conditions. They do sprout, okay, and they do make a seed bank. So the seeds will fall onto the soil, but they won't germinate immediately. They'll actually remain dormant for a year after they're dropped. Very different. Okay. Black ash grows in swamps. Okay. They need high light to reach the overstory. You have a similar situation with green ash here, where you have wet soil, so you don't get a heavy canopy, and that limits establishment of other species and reduces competition. That favors black ash. Okay. They grow really, really slowly because they're growing in swamps, and it's cold and wet and a nasty place to be, right? So they grow really, really slowly. They do sprout, okay? They do make a seed bank, and they do form pure stands, but not so much down here, more further north. Very scattered in southeastern Michigan. Okay. So why am I telling you all this? Because you can put this together, I think, and try to use what we know about green ash to predict how the other species are going to react to EAB. Okay. So I did this using life histories. Okay. Northerly distribution I didn't talk so much about, so I'm not even going to bother with it. But we can talk about competitors limited by site conditions. That helps green ash. It helps black ash because they're growing in places where other species can't grow so well. White ash doesn't have that advantage, okay, because it's growing in an area where heavy shade, a lot of species, they don't have limitations on competitors there in the uplands, okay. Canopy development limited by site conditions. Again, white ash is at the disadvantage, green and black are at an advantage, okay. When you have the canopy broken up by EAB, you're actually allowing more light to the forest floor. That helps green ash and black ash. White ash, it doesn't matter too much because there's lots of other species there that can fill those gaps. Okay. Green ash is fast growing. Okay. Black ash is not. White ash is somewhere in the middle. They all sprout. Okay. Green ash doesn't form a seed bank. The others do. Okay. And this idea of forming dense stands or groves is one of green ash, but not the other two. So you put all these together and say, how can I use these to say whether or not ash is going to persist? Okay. Seems to me green ash has a high probability to persist with emerald ash borer. It has the traits that will help it. Okay. Black ash, maybe. It's the point with the scary thing about black ash is there's just not very much around. You don't see real big stands of pure black ash. Where you see it, it's very scattered. And for that alone, I think it's going to have some problems because it seems to me you need a lot of ash there to see it persist, right? And then white ash, I think, is going to have the hardest problem. And that's the problem because white ash is the most valued of any of these. They're going to have to find something else to make baseball bats out of, I think. Okay, so I'm also involved in another project that kind of keeps me up at night sometimes, which is something called biocontrol. So some colleagues at Michigan State have been at the forefront of the release of some Asian parasitoid wasps. Okay, they've released 3 in Michigan and several other states now. The first releases in Michigan were 2007. So these are tiny little wasps here. Yes, I have them on there. Good. These 2 kill the larvae, and this one kills the eggs. Okay. So these are non-native species released, and it's a little too early to tell, but it does seem to be the case that we're finding where, so these were released, there was a release plot and then a plot near it where there was no release. And the plots where the wasps were released, we seem to find much bigger ash trees than in the control plots. So it's way too early to make any conclusions yet, but it could be that this is helping. But you have to be able to chew on the fact that you've released a non-native species to help you fight a non-native species. As I said, it keeps me up at night. Okay, there's also the idea of lingering ash, okay? Some idea that maybe those ash that survived have some kind of genetic resistance to EAB, okay? At first, people thought there's no genetic resistance to EAB because they were looking at street trees where there's no genetic diversity. Most of the street trees are all coming from the same couple of sources. So, but now when folks have gone out into rural areas, they've found surviving trees, and there are websites that have you enter the GPS coordinates. If you find a surviving tree bigger than 10 centimeters, you're supposed to tell them where it is, then go out and try to collect seed, okay? So could be that these are resistant, don't really know. What's interesting is if there are any resistant ash, they are probably green ash, because green ash has the highest genetic diversity of any of the ash species. Because there were, the way it was explained to me, 2 genetic populations. One came from the Mississippi drainage, okay, and one came from further east, closer to the Atlantic Ocean, and they merged, and so you have this genetic diversity coming from that merging, okay, compared to the other species. Okay, so this is a possibility. I'm a little skeptical myself. I think that most of these surviving trees are just surviving trees. And I think, I'm trying to think of a delicate way to put this, but the same people that are saying that these may be resistant trees are the same people that said they were going to disappear. All right, so concluding, okay? So green ash might hang on because they have surviving trees, they're sprouting, and they're seeding, and those seeds are growing, becoming seedlings, okay? Now, as we said, all the ash species probably are not going to all respond the same way, which is another thing that has been pretty heavily overlooked. Because they've killed all the ash species, everybody thinks the ash are all going to react the same way. And I've tried to show you that they all have different life history traits, even though they're in the same genus. They're all ash, but the different species of ash have different ecological and life history traits that'll probably have them respond differently to the emerald ash borer. The biggest thing is, I'm optimistic that green ash is going to survive, but don't be optimistic that it's going to look like it used to, because it's not. It's just not. It's going to be, if anything, it'll be like elm. It'll be small and squirrely and probably, to many people, ugly. But the fact that it's out there, to me, is a much better thing to think about than the fact that it goes extinct or disappears from this part of the country. Okay? So I want to end on this again, because I think this bothers me. This is a doomsday scenario, okay? And understandably, when folks, and I'm sure I did, and I'm sure many in this room, first saw what EAB was doing, it's very easy to come to this conclusion. But what bothers me is that as more data rolls in, and in southeastern Michigan, we have the data, because this is where it started, and we can look to Oklahoma and say, look, man, this is what you're going to look like in 15 years. So we have the data here, and as more and more data is collected, we're finding and learning new things, but it seems hard to change this story. Really, really hard to change this story. Okay? And again, I'm not sure what we're fighting. Part of it is we're fighting EAB, but I think part of it is we're fighting that doomsday scenario that people just seem to not want to let go of. Okay? It's very, very difficult to extirpate or exterminate a tree species. Okay? And green ash in particular seems pretty resilient even to this pest that has really done a number on it. Okay? But you look out there and it's just willing, it depends on what you're willing to see. Okay? So here's an example just to finish. This is a screen grab, and when you mouse over it, this pops up. Dead ash tree from EAB. And I look at that and I say, it's certainly ugly, right? But it's not dead. Okay? And then you look, you can find, so this, I'm not hammering gardeningforwildlife.com, okay? But on here it says, oh boy, common tree of our forest landscape, blah, 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 blah. These trees are under attack. Another native tree that is in danger. It could even become extinct in this country. It's happened before, okay? A tree became practically extinct when the elm tree fell victim to Dutch elm disease and died out. So there's a 50-year-old story that has not changed to some people.
Yeah, because elms haven't died out.
No. So to me, I think it's very important to keep your mind open and to be patient, because these things are pretty resilient and they could surprise a lot of people, hopefully. But you got to be willing to be surprised. Okay. And with that, I'll acknowledge all these people that helped. Okay. Thank you very much.